Title: A Week That Turned the Lights Back On. It began with a siren. Daniel Ruiz was halfway up the front steps when the cruiser slid past his split-level ranch, lights washing the siding in red and blue. He paused, listening. 2 streets over. Rosewood Drive. That was where the Whitakers lived. He had waved at Mr. Whitaker the night before as the man unloaded a case of beer from his trunk, whistling loudly at nothing in particular. Inside, the house was oddly quiet. Elena's phone cast a cold glow over the couch. Their son, Mateo, was shut in his room, a chair jammed under the knob. Their daughter, Ava, had fallen asleep in the kitchen, her head on the open history book beneath the breakfast nook lamp. Grace before meals had given way to microwaved leftovers, silence, and the background hum of a television no one really watched. Daniel stood there a moment and told himself it was fine. Everyone was tired. Everyone was busy. Everyone had their own world. But the siren kept echoing long after it passed. He woke Elena gently and turned off the lamp over Ava's book. In the hallway, he stopped at Mateo's door. No music. No game sounds. Just the stubborn hush of a teenage boy who didn't want to be asked how his day went. Daniel went to bed and stared at the ceiling until the first soft plane of dawn. He thought of Sundays that used to mean tying little laces, smoothing cowlicks, the soft hush of Holy Name Church as Father Michael raised the host and Elena squeezed his hand. He thought of last Sunday, when they'd watched Mass online on double speed because Mateo's practice ran long and Elena had promised her sister she'd help at the craft market and Daniel had a client who needed pricing numbers by Monday morning. When the alarm finally buzzed, he felt older than his age. He rolled over to say good morning. But Elena was already up, her phone buzzing in her palm. A chirp from the kitchen, the fridge filter reminder. His house reminded him to care for everything except the one thing he had stopped caring for: his family's soul. He didn't know why the words came to him like that. He didn't talk like that. But as he followed the smell of coffee into the kitchen, the phrase weighed on him like wet denim. By the time he dropped Ava at school, he had decided the thought was melodramatic. He pushed it aside and dove into spreadsheets, quotes, timelines. He nodded through a conference call and laughed when his boss tried a joke he'd used last week. He told himself he would shake the heaviness later. Then his phone buzzed with a text from Colleen, a friend from the parish. It was a link and a line, thought of your family. He tapped the video open and heard a woman's voice he couldn't place. The words weren't thunder, but they struck like it. If you don't lead your family to heaven, you could be leading them somewhere else without meaning to. The voice spoke of 5 sins that hollow out a home like termites, neglecting to teach the faith, living a double life, skipping the sacraments, staying silent about each other's falls, and abandoning the souls entrusted to you. Daniel clicked out of the video. He sat very still at his desk while the cursor blinked at him from the empty field of a price column. The words had felt childish for a second. Souls, heaven, sin, but they lingered. He saw Mateo swearing at his own homework and hurling a pencil against the wall. He heard Ava ask last week if God punished kids who cheated and how he had shrugged and said, just don't cheat. He remembered Elena telling him she didn't have time to pray because she had to keep up with clients on her phone even at night. He remembered himself setting an example of quiet cynicism, telling the kids to be honest while bragging about skirting a vendor's late fee, joking with Elena about church people being dramatic, people who loved to talk about grace but liked their gossip more. He closed his laptop. At lunch, he drove to Holy Name. In the quiet, he found Father Michael in the confessional, as if he had been waiting all morning for the door to creak open. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," Daniel said, and the words felt rusty, like a hinge being forced after years of neglect. He told the priest about the sirens, about the video, about the way the house had grown silent and separated, every person in their own small room. "I don't know how to move the needle," Daniel admitted. "I'm a project manager. I can plot a Gantt chart for a skyscraper, but I can't get 4 people to say a single prayer together." Father Michael's silhouette shifted behind the screen. "What if you stopped managing and started beginning?" he said. "Not a program, not a campaign, just a beginning." "I need more than a beginning," Daniel said. "I need a plan." The priest hesitated. Then he chuckled softly. "You're not the first to want that. All right. A plan. But a plan that feels like a family. Not a hostile takeover. 7 days. Small steps. But first things first. The 5 sins?" Daniel said, half joking. He heard his own voice crack. "Call them what you like." Father Michael replied, "I call them ways the lights go out. You've been walking around in the dark long enough to mistake it for normal. You're not evil, Daniel. You're busy. You're tired. You're tempted to settle. But you and Elena were made to be watchmen on the walls for your home. If you see a blade coming and say nothing, is that love?" Daniel thought of the siren, the blue and red washing the neighbor's siding. He thought of last Christmas when Elena had cried quietly in bed and said she felt alone even in a house full of people. He thought of the time Mateo came home with bloody knuckles and said, He shoved Ava. "Dad, what was I supposed to do?" He had told his son to watch his temper. He had not told him how to fight the right fight. "I'll try the plan," he said. "Begin tonight." Father Michael told him, "Grace isn't a motivational speech. It's a person waiting to be invited. Start by inviting him. 1 prayer. Then let the rest unfold." Daniel walked out with a lightness that made him suspicious of himself. The sun lit the stained glass from behind and gold spilled over the pew where he and Elena used to sit. He sat for a minute in that light and asked quietly, "What do you want me to do?" He heard his own heartbeat, and beneath it the faint hum of a sanctuary lamp that had never stopped burning. Day 1, a flame in the living room. At 7 that night, Daniel clicked off the game Mateo was playing. He did it gently but without apology. Elena looked up from her phone. "Wary. I want to try something," Daniel said. "It's small. It's partly for me." Mateo rolled his eyes. Ava tucked her knees beneath her on the couch. 2 prayers, Daniel said. Out loud. Together. Then we're done. No speeches. Why? Mateo said. It was not a question. It was an accusation lodged inside a teenager's fear of being exposed. Because the house is too quiet, Daniel said. Because I don't think we're okay. Because if we don't say one thing to God, we're saying something else whether we realize it or not. Elena surprised him. She nodded and slipped her phone face down on the coffee table. They stood awkwardly, like tourists at a strange monument. Daniel cleared his throat and said, Our Father. The words felt old and new, like a melody forgotten somewhere in his ribs. Elena's voice steadied his. Ava's small alto threaded between them. Mateo's voice came late, a muttered accompaniment that grew as the words ran on. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. When they finished, Daniel felt like something had clicked back into place inside the house. If only by a hair. That's it, he said. Sit back down. Thank you. No second prayer? Ava asked softly. Tomorrow, Daniel said. He didn't have to be all things at once. He had to begin. He slept deeply that night for the first time in months. Day 2, the book no one opened. He placed the Gospel of Mark on the breakfast bar before work. Elena raised an eyebrow. Mateo looked like he might knock it off the counter on principle. Vending machine faith. Mateo said. Press A3 for miracles. 3 verses. Daniel said. That's all. We're trying this for a week. Then we can vote. Daniel read about the paralyzed man whose friends tore open a roof. It took him 40 seconds. When he looked up, Ava was already nodding. I like the friends, she said. They were extra. Crazy, Mateo said. But he wasn't sneering. They vandalized someone's roof to get to Jesus. Kind of messed up. How far will you go for your friends? Elena said. Half to herself. Then she frowned. How far will you go for your family? She picked up the Bible and weighed it in her hand as if testing a new tool. Same time tonight, she said. After work. Daniel parked on Rosewood and watched a police car creep past the Whitakers again. Slower this time. He didn't know the full story. He only knew whispers. He sat in his truck and thought about roofs being opened. He thought about the roofs he could open and the ones he had boarded shut. Day 3. Gratitude at the table. They had tacos. The table was a bright mess of cilantro and squeezed limes. When Elena raised her water glass, Daniel nodded toward her hands. Say it, he said. She hesitated and then closed her eyes. Thank you, Lord, for the food, she said. For how Daniel remembered the sour cream this time, and how Ava helped chop tomatoes, and how Mateo didn't complain about soccer practice, even though he hates wind sprints. Bless the people who picked the tomatoes and the ones who can't afford dinner. Amen. They looked at each other. Something too gentle for a laugh and too warm for silence rustled across the table like a breeze. I still hate wind sprints, Mateo said. God knows, Elena said. And the way she smiled at her son landed in Daniel's chest like a homecoming. After dinner, the doorbell rang. Daniel opened it to find Mrs. Whitaker on the porch, a bruise beneath her left eye. She flinched, then shook her head as if remembering where she was. I shouldn't have come, she whispered. Come in, Daniel said. Elena was at the door before he finished. She guided the woman to the couch and brought an ice pack. Mateo hovered uncertainly and then vanished, returning with a blanket. Ava set down a glass of water like a serious nurse. I fell, Mrs. Whitaker said. That's what I told the officers when they came earlier. No one answered for a second. Then Daniel said, Do you want me to call Father Michael? Mrs. Whitaker nodded once. A quick jerk of the head that looked like relief and fear braided together. While Daniel dialed, Elena sat beside their neighbor and took her hand. Day 4. Planting love where it hurts. Daniel took a personal day. Together they drove Mrs. Whitaker to a safe apartment the parish maintained. Father Michael met them there with a social worker from the city. There would be forms and statements and court dates later. For now, there was a door that locked and a pantry with canned soup and a number Ava wrote in block letters for the woman to call if she wanted company. On the ride home, Mateo stared out the window. Coach says sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, he said. That guy hit her. I want to break his nose. Elena glanced at Daniel, then back at their son. We don't answer violence by pretending it isn't there, she said. We're not pacifists because we're cowards. We choose the fight that saves someone, not the one that satisfies us. So do we just take it? Mateo asked. Tell me where that's in the Bible. Daniel thought of the friends tearing open the roof. Sometimes, he said carefully, we break the roof. Sometimes we go to the police. Sometimes we take people to the priest. Sometimes we stand at a door and say, you will not pass. Your coach is right that there's a fight. He is wrong about which one wins. Mateo huffed, but he didn't push back. When they reached home, he surprised Daniel by carrying in groceries without being asked. That night, they read a few more verses. The paralyzed man stood. The room filled with amazement. Mateo didn't look amazed, but he looked interested. It was a beginning. Day 5, a door with a key. Confession. Daniel said at breakfast. There's a service at 6. I'll go first. Come if you want. Elena looked nervous. Ava looked hopeful. Mateo rolled his eyes. Daniel told himself he would go even if he went alone. At 5:50, Elena came downstairs wearing a sweater Daniel loved because he had bought it for her when they were still learning each other's favorite colors. She didn't say a word. She put the car keys in his hand. They sat in the back. The line moved slowly. Father Michael looked tired and gently joyful, like a man who had been sitting by a well all afternoon in the sun and had never thought once of asking for a break. Daniel went first. He named the small cuts he inflicted every day with his sarcasm. The quiet cheating he congratulated himself for because it was the kind no one called cheating. He named his neglect, his fatigue, his lack of courage. I am not cruel to my family, he said. I just stopped showing them where the water is. Sometimes that's the same thing by degrees, Father Michael said. And there was no venom in his voice, just a kind grief. God isn't disappointed in you. He is hungry for you. He wants your house on his map again. When Daniel stepped out, he saw Elena slip into the confessional. He saw Mateo flick his eyes to the floor. The line had mercifully grown longer. It would be a while. Daniel slid into a pew with Ava and waited in the soft murmur of whispered sins and whispered absolutions. When they left, the sky had a thin crescent of moon. The parking lot smelled like leaves. You were right, Elena said quietly as they buckled in. I didn't know how much I needed to hear someone say, I absolve you. Daniel didn't answer. He put his hand over hers and felt the steady rise and fall of breath. The simplest prayer. Day 6, the table we forgot. On Saturday evening, they went to Mass. They dressed a little better than usual. Not out of vanity, but because they wanted to mark the difference. Daniel arrived early because he wanted to kneel in front of the tabernacle and not rush past it like a commuter passing a statue he doesn't recognize. The opening hymn didn't thrill him, and the homily wasn't eloquent. But the gospel struck like an arrow. Father Michael read slowly, as if laying plank after plank over a gap. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? Daniel glanced at Elena and saw the words land on her face too. When they went up for communion, Daniel squeezed Elena's hand once more, then placed his palm beneath the minister's and looked at the host and whispered, without even meaning to, Stay in this house. After Mass, there was a coffee hour. The Whitakers didn't show. The rumor mill ground steadily in the corners of the hall, the way rumor mills do, with concern sharpened by curiosity. Elena steered Daniel past the small clumps of whispering people and toward the door. Outside, Mateo stopped at the steps and looked at the statue of Mary to the left of the entrance. He didn't say a prayer. That was fine. He looked. That was a prayer Daniel had not seen in his son's eyes in a long time. Tomorrow, Elena said as they crossed the lot. We do the 7th day. Then we decide what stays. And what goes, Daniel said. He was thinking of his late-night work blurts and the way his temper flashed at small annoyances. At the sink full of cups. At the laundry left in the dryer so long it might as well be permanent decor. Day 7, the consecration. On Sunday night, they cleared the dining table and set a single candle at the center. Elena placed a small statue of Mary beside the candle. The plastic had scuff marks from being moved from house to house over the years, but the face was soft and steady. We are not making a show, Daniel said. We are not telling the world we're holier than yesterday. We are saying we want to belong to God through Mary, as a family. He looked at the children. I am going to say words you don't have to say if you don't believe them. I ask you to listen and to tell me later if you are angry or skeptical or confused. I promise not to preach. Elena took his hand. We are carving a roof, she whispered. He read from a simple card the parish had given him. We entrust our home, our marriage, and our children to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, that she may lead us to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Ava's voice came first, barely above a whisper, repeating the words. Then Elena's. Steady. Then Mateo. With a pause so long Daniel thought he might walk out. But he didn't. He kept his feet and said the final line with them. When they finished, Elena blew out the candle and watched the smoke climb in a thin ribbon before disappearing. What now? Mateo said. Now we keep going. Daniel said. We keep the prayers. We keep the Bible. We keep confession. We keep Mass. We keep finding people like Mrs. Whitaker and breaking roofs for them. Mateo crossed his arms. And what do we stop? We stop pretending we're fine when we're not. Elena said. We stop praising hard work while worshiping hurry. We stop using our phones like they're rosaries and our sarcasm like it's wisdom. That last one is for your father, Ava said. Solemn. Daniel laughed, startled by how clean his laughter sounded. He almost missed the knock. It was Mr. Whitaker. He stood on the porch like a man waiting to be refused. He had shaved but missed a stripe along his jaw. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands were empty. They took my statement, he said hoarsely. I'm getting help. Elena stepped forward. Careful. Is she safe tonight? She asked. She said she was, he said. She said she's with church people who told her she can take all the time she wants. Daniel steadied himself against the doorframe. He could smell stale beer and something like shame. Can I come in? Mr. Whitaker asked. Not tonight, Daniel said gently. You need to rest. We'll meet you at the parish office tomorrow. Mr. Whitaker nodded. Before he turned, he added in a voice so small it amazed Daniel that a grown man could fit it in his throat, I didn't know how to stop until everything broke. Daniel watched him walk down the steps. He didn't argue. He didn't offer easy words. He just stood there, a watchman on his own threshold, and prayed the simplest prayer he knew, stay. The next week, when the lights stay on. They would discover how complicated it is to keep the lights on. The second week, Mateo would get into an argument on the field when a teammate made a cruel comment about a girl from another school. He would shove the teammate. Daniel would bench him from a family movie night as a consequence, and then sit on the edge of his son's bed and talk about the difference between justice and payback. They would disagree for a while. They would finish by planning how Mateo could confront the behavior without repeating the harm. Ava would come home in tears because a teacher brushed off a classmate's bullying comment as kids being kids. Elena would be the one to go to the school and insist, without screaming, that the line between teasing and cruelty is not a line you let blur if you're responsible for children's hearts. She would make a pest of herself in the right way. Later, she would help Ava write a letter to the girl who had been hurt. Not a lecture. Just a simple, "I saw what happened and it wasn't right and I am your friend even if I get it wrong sometimes." At work, Daniel would have a chance to pad an invoice without anyone noticing. He would stare at the number for a long time and delete the extra line. He would call the client and say they'd come in lower after all. When his boss made a comment about money being the only scoreboard people respect, Daniel would try to joke, would stop, and would say instead that some scoreboards make you a champion of things you don't want to be. They would miss a night of prayer because the dishwasher sprang a leak and Daniel skinned his knuckles trying to shut off the water. Elena would find him under the sink and hand him a towel and say, "Tomorrow." And tomorrow they would pick up without making speeches about failure. Because grace is not an A or an F. It is a person who keeps returning without keeping a ledger. They would meet Mrs. Whitaker at the parish office with Father Michael and the social worker. They would listen more than they spoke. They would carry boxes when she decided she was ready to go back to the house. Once the court had issued what it needed to issue, they would stand in her kitchen and wipe down a counter and feel like they were wiping something else much heavier. On a Thursday 2 weeks later, Daniel would wake to silence again. He would panic for a moment before he realized the silence had changed. It was not the dead hush of 4 people in separate rooms, screens lighting their faces like small lonely altars. It was the silence of a house that had spoken to God and was waiting to hear what he would say back. That night, Mateo would ask for the first time if they could pray for his teammate who had made the cruel comment. "He's a jerk," Mateo would say, "but his dad is a worse one. Maybe that's why." Daniel would nod. And they would. And for the first time in a long time, he would feel something he recognized and had missed almost to the point of heartbreak, hope dressed as courage. A conversation they couldn't avoid. It arrived. As such conversations do. Through the door you never lock because you don't think anyone will try it. A family friend posted a video about violence in the city with a caption that said, "People get what they deserve." Elena saw it and bristled. She typed a reply and deleted it. Then she typed another one and deleted that too. At dinner, she brought it up. "Where do we stand on this?" she asked. "Do we pretend that suffering is always earned? Do we condemn from our couches? Do we tell boys like Mateo to fight and girls like Ava to take it because history runs on cruel fuel?" Mateo groaned. "Can we not?" "No," Elena said. "We cannot not. Not today." Daniel thought of Mr. Whitaker with his misstripe of beard and his voice like a boiled-down version of a man. He thought of the rioters after a shooting 2 towns over and the small businesses with plywood where their windows had been. He thought of the woman at his office who had confided in him about an abusive boyfriend and how he had encouraged her to make a plan and how he had not followed up because he had a deadline. Violence is not just what a fist does, Daniel said slowly. It's what a crowd ignores. It's the harm that slips through the cracks we call reasonable. It's children learning they are alone. He took a breath. And injustice is not a complicated debate topic. It's a child going hungry in a city with a new stadium. It's a nursing aide working 2 jobs while the owners donate $1 million to a gala with flowers more expensive than a mortgage. It's a neighbor's bruise. It's a school that laughs when a line is crossed, but calls a mother a problem when she says, "Enough." Mateo looked cornered. So we pray and do nothing. We pray and do something. Elena said. We fix a roof. We stand at a door. We make a call. We write a letter. We show up to the place everyone says is too small to matter. We vote. We volunteer. We teach you to be a man who stops harm without enjoying the stopping. Ava put her elbows on the table and rested her chin on her fists. We fight the right way. Yes, Daniel said. He didn't add that he did not know the exact contours of the right way every time. He did not pretend to have a program. He had a beginning. He had day 1. Over and over. Until day 7 folded into day 1 again, and the lamp beside the tabernacle burned in his house as it burned at Holy Name. A Sunday with no siren. 6 weeks after the night of the siren. They sat in their pew and Elena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and smiled at Daniel when their palms brushed. Father Michael preached simply about the Holy Family. He said home is not a place without conflict. Home is the place where conflict is measured not by who wins, but by who grows in love. He said mercy has bones. It is not a feeling that softens. It is a decision that strengthens. After Mass, Daniel found himself standing near the statue of Mary. Mr. Whitaker approached with cautious steps. He looked better. He looked like a man who had wept and might again, and was learning that this is not weakness. How is she? Daniel asked. She says she sleeps. Mr. Whitaker said. She says the quiet is different now. He was silent for a moment. Thank you for not slamming the door. We taught ourselves how to open roofs this month. Daniel said lightly. Mr. Whitaker smiled crookedly. You should teach a class. We're beginners. Daniel said. We always will be. That afternoon, they took a walk by the river that runs behind the big brick library downtown. Mateo kicked at a rock and it skipped into the water. Ava picked up a red leaf and pressed it into a paperback she carried in her coat pocket. Elena slipped her arm through Daniel's and leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. They reached the footbridge and stopped. The sun lay low across the water. A long path of light. Do you think we'll keep it? Elena asked. We already are, Daniel said. They stood a while longer. The wind tugged at their jackets and then let them go. Epilogue, before the next beginning. There would be more sirens. That is how the world is. There would be nights when prayers felt like muttering into a dark room. There would be days when Daniel lost his temper and Mateo blamed a ref because that was easier than owning his mistake. There would be phone calls they didn't want to make and couches that were easier than showing up at the parish hall to fold donated clothes. But there would also be things they hadn't expected. Elena would start her day with 10 minutes in the living room even when she was still in pajamas. Ava would begin to keep a little notebook of people to pray for, and she would ask Daniel every Saturday if he could light a candle with her at church for one of the names. Mateo would come home after a rough practice and toss his bag down and say, Okay, so coach isn't exactly wrong. But he's not right either. And Daniel would hand him a glass of milk, and they would talk about how to hit harder than violence ever can with what is stronger than anger. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Daniel would wake to Elena lighting the single candle they had lit the night they consecrated their home. She would turn and say, "I don't want perfect. I want this." And Daniel would understand that the week had never been a program. It had been a door. There would be a moment on a different Sunday when Father Michael, worn but kind, would pause after communion and say, "If your home is dark, do not be ashamed. Begin. If your family feels broken, do not be afraid. Begin. Light one candle. Say one prayer. Open one roof. Begin." Daniel would look at Elena and the children and hear in his heart the single word that had remapped his house: stay. And in the quiet that followed, he would know that the light in the lamp, at church and at home, was not merely a symbol. It was a presence. It was a promise. It was the beginning. Again. Invitation to you. If you made it this far, your voice matters. The story is not just about one family, but about how we all respond to violence and injustice around us. What do you believe is the right way to confront harm without becoming part of the harm? Where should a family draw the line between mercy and accountability? Do communities enable violence by staying silent, or inflame it by answering blow for blow? Share your stance in the comments. Be clear. Be charitable. Take a side. And explain why. Your perspective could be the door someone else needs to begin.